all a talk is, and all your interviews are really, are small chunks of things. If I do a 45-minute keynote, then it's going to be chunks of 3 minutes, say. It's a story, some stats, it's something that's relevant to the audience, it's a funny bit, a video clip, whatever it happens to be. And so I think if you work on those chunks, it means that you can keep your 45 minutes roughly the same, but nearly every time you do it, try a different chunk in the middle somewhere.
Welcome to an encore podcast presentation from Forbes Books at ForbesBooks.com.
So I'm very interested in hearing about your new book, Get Good at Presenting.
Great.
The No-Nonsense Guide to Authentic and Engaging Public Speaking. I'm talking with Lee Jackson. He's a motivational speaker and presentation coach. His website is leejackson.biz. So this is not your first book. It's not your second book. It's, I think, your 12th book.
Yes, I was surprised about that as well, Greg. It was the kind of time flies and you realize that you've written quite a lot, over the last 25 years or so. And some books I've obviously wrote with friends and colleagues and things like that. But yeah, the last few books have been on my own. And this is the first one where I decided to empty my head, if you understand that phrase, of everything I've learned as a speaker and decided to put it into a book to help other people, basically.
And it's interesting, you're not just a speaker who does a lot of professional speaking, a lot of corporate work and other types of work, but you're also, or you were the 2017 president of the Professional Speaking Association in the UK and Ireland.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a job you can't apply for. They ask you whether you would like to do it. And I was really flattered and, honored to get the call. And I said, yeah, of course. So the PSA, the Professional Speaking Association in the UK and Ireland, as we call it, the PSA, is the American equivalent is the NSA,
correct?
Which is obviously a lot bigger. And I've been to the NSA conference last year as president. But yeah, we have 650 members approximately, professional speakers from all walks of life. And it's a great fun. And when we get together and meet in our regions and our conferences, we have great fun together because you can imagine how loud the room is with 200 speakers in it, Greg,
I've been to NSA meetings. I know how loud the room can get. So I have to assume that when you are you're now the past president, but when you are, I guess, tapped or anointed to that role, it's not just, I would imagine it's not, so I've never spoken with the president of a speaking organization like the PSA or the NSA, but I have to assume that it's not just an acknowledgement of your leadership skills and your managerial skills, but also an acknowledgement of your speaking skills, because a speaking organization doesn't want a bad speaker as their president.
Yeah, I think that's kind of fundamental. So, I joined I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was a local person involved locally, got on the committee, the team in Yorkshire, PSA in the Yorkshire region in the north of England. And then I was vice president and then president of Yorkshire region. So they saw what I could do on a regional level. And there's also quite a north-south divide in the UK as well. So what happens is that there obviously will be a lot of people from London that would be president, and I think they also wanted to mix it up and have someone from the north too. So it's a little bit of a diversity quota, I guess, of having a north
politics. It's amazing where it shows up, just about everywhere, right?
I think they were due a northerner, Greg. Someone who was could speak their mind, and someone who spoke in a different accent, I think.
So tell me about your background, as you're clearly a speaker and internationally. I mean, you work all over the world. You're a presentation coach, which explains the book, Get Good at Presenting, the No-Nonsense Guide to Authentic and Engaging Public Speaking. This is your 12th book. But how did you get into this field of being a professional speaker?
That's a great question. I got into it really by accident because, I got into it as a youth worker. So I was a youth worker and got a job. I sort of co-founded a charity of youth workers attached to schools. So pretty much on the first few days of my job, I said, could you come and do an assembly to say a few words with some kids in school? And so I turned up. And I walked into a hall and there was 600 teenagers looking at me.
Mm.
And so that was
and how old were you?
So I would be 23.
So you weren't that far out of being a teen yourself.
No, you can kind of, it goes in stages. I am a long way from that now, but it goes in stages.
Me too.
I think what happens, Greg, is you're a young person, and then you become the older brother,
Yes.
and then you become the fun uncle, and then you kind of become their dad. That's kind of how it works.
And then we should all avoid becoming the crabby old guy. So, but I'm planning on never getting there. I'm assuming the same is true for you.
Me and my wife have discussed this a lot. One of my main aims in life is to be a nice old person. That's one of my aims.
So you're what you call a youth worker, and there's 600 teenagers. You're about 23, and someone says, well, gee, Lee, go say something deep and meaningful and motivational to them.
Yeah, and it was kind of a youth work, so it was different in those. It wasn't just a motivational thing. I would do stuff about life skills, and I'll do stuff about faith, friendship, life skills, all kinds of things. So yeah, I probably spoke about getting the best out of life, or believing in who you are, or some stuff about self-esteem. That's probably where I started, Greg, I think, yeah.
And were you exhilarated by this opportunity or terrified?
I think speaking is a combination of both of those things, isn't it? I think
even now?
Well, now you're obviously more used to it. When you've done hundreds of them, you obviously get more used to it. But yeah, of course, there's some level of anxiety. I talk a lot in the book about anxiety, because that's one of the three things that people want to know. They want to know how to prepare material. They want to know how to deliver well when they're on their feet. And they want to know how to be less nervous. That's basically what they want from a presentation coach. And so, yeah, I learned that a long way. But so standing in front of those kids, those 600 kids back in the 90s, I guess it was kind of a sink or swim moment. It was like, I'm going to have to step up here. I'm going to have to go for it. And thankfully, I swam rather than sunk. And I found out I was quite good at it. And of course, I relish it as well. I mean, the danger of that, Greg, of course, is if you love something too much, you can actually become quite egotistical about it. And there's nothing an audience hates more than someone who's doing it for an ego trip. They want you to be real, to be normal.
And, you mentioned you've done hundreds of presentations. And I've done hundreds of presentations too, but I'm always behind a microphone and I'm not looking at the audience. And so what you do is very different. And I'm just wondering, going back to then and fast forward to today, when you're making a presentation, can you feel the reaction of the audience?
I think you get to know what works and what doesn't work. But ultimately, you're always trying out new things at one level or another. I think there's nothing worse than having a speaker who's done the same talk word for word for 35 years,
I think they call that many of my college professors.
Yes. Yeah, they designed it, with those slides or whatever, all those years ago, and now I will stick to this forever.
Yes, I am not budging from the script.
That's right.
Even after all these years, 25 years, hundreds of speeches, you've actually been the president of the NSA equivalent in the UK and Ireland, the Professional Speaking Association. Even now, you're telling us you're trying things. And if that's the case, I want to understand why it's important to keep trying things. And how do you know what to try next?
Yeah, great question. I think, if you, one of the things I teach in the book is about chunks, that a speech really, one of the ways to do it better is to understand that it's not a whole thing itself. So people get nervous when they think, it's a big speech, and it's actually all a talk is, and all your interviews are small chunks of things. And so I like to break that up into a chunk, So in effect, you're thinking, if I do a 45-minute keynote, then it's going to be chunks of 3 minutes, say. It's a story, it's some stats, it's something that's relevant to the audience, it's a funny bit, a video clip, whatever it happens to be. And so I think if you work on those chunks, it means that you can keep your 45 minutes roughly the same, but nearly every time you do it, try a different chunk in the middle somewhere. Because that's how you develop new material. Comedians do it a lot. They'll do 10 minutes of solid stuff, but they'll just try 3 or 4 minutes of new stuff just to see whether it works. And that's kind of what I do. And still working in schools a little bit as well. That keeps me pretty sharp as well, because kids give you immediate feedback, Greg. Do you know what I mean?
Not so polite necessarily.
No. You can tell by their face that bit worked, that bit didn't. It's pretty instant, really. Adults pretend a bit more,
So I want to move on from this, but I do want to ask one other question about it. And
Sure.
that is, this idea of chunks, I think, is really powerful. And so for you, as seasoned as you are, I'm also guessing that when you approach it this way and you can really focus on different chunks to hone it, to try new things, I'm guessing that just the activity of approaching it that way and always being engaged to improve and to try new things keeps the material fresh and exciting for you too, because you don't necessarily know how it's all going to work out either, or at least in one chunk or another.
Yeah, of course. It makes it interesting for me, and it makes it interesting for the audience. I mean, things move on. Some stories are timeless.
Yes.
But some things move on. So when I first developed my school talk that I still deliver, and many years ago, my kind of motivational thing, which has roughly stayed the same. But when I look at it now, I've changed nearly everything eventually over the years, because I used to have a story about maybe an artist, a pop artist or somebody who isn't famous anymore, or you can talk about Usain Bolt now, just about, but because he's retiring and disappearing,
right?
You probably need to find out who the next sports star would be. Do you know what I mean? And,
yes, exactly right.
It's just life, isn't it? Just life moves on, and we all learn different things, and you've got to keep things fresh. Even reading from the newspapers that day is a good thing to do.
We're talking with Lee Jackson. He's a motivational speaker. He's a presentation coach. He's the author of 12 books. The latest book is Get Good at Presenting, the no-nonsense guide to authentic and engaging public speaking. He's also the past president, the 2017 past president of the Professional Speaking Association in the UK and Ireland. It's their equivalent of the National Speakers Association here in the US. And so I'm going to ask you a question, and I know the easy answer, so I'm just going to say it for you. So the question is, what can I do to become a great presenter like you? And I know the easy answer is get your book. And I encourage people to do that. But beyond that, what can we learn in addition to the idea of chunks that can really give us the same kind of confidence in our presentation skills that you have when you get up in front of an audience?
Ultimately, there is no replacement for being on your feet in front of an audience. You can read my book about presenting. You can read, another 100 books about presenting from various people with good stuff in it and maybe not so good stuff. But ultimately, there's no replacement of being on your feet. But the key is that when you're on your feet, to get some feedback, because you can, like you said, a college professor can do the same talk for 25 years and ignore any feedback that they get and just keep doing the same thing. So we can actually embed bad habits if we just do it a lot. So the key is to get on your feet, to volunteer in the workplace, to do stuff, to get out locally to local, to youth groups and church groups and community groups, and just get on your feet and then learn, and then ask a friend to come with you or video it yourself and give yourself some feedback. And that's the difference. It's having that external voice, someone like myself, a good presentation coach, or maybe just a friend who can say, actually, that bit didn't really work. Have you thought about doing this instead?
I have noticed, and so I'm interested in getting your take on this, that there are some people who are technically skilled at speaking, but maybe they are not reaching me, even though they seem to have all the right skills and maybe even the experience. And then I've noticed there's people who are driven by the passion or the mission of the message. And even though their speaking is not technically skilled, they can hit me like a ton of bricks. And is that something we should be thinking about, being technically proficient, but also making sure that the message is important to us so that we can make it an important message for the listener?
I think ultimately the subtitle of my book has the word authentic in it.
Mm.
And I think that person usually that connects with your heart is usually someone who's authentic. They're telling a proper story, and you think, wow, they are the real deal.
Yes.
That makes the connection. You can have someone who is technically brilliant and can hit all the, can do everything correctly and have perfect grammar and deliver everything, but ultimately they won't connect. So it's got to be a mixture of the two, really, depending on the style of presenting that you're doing. I think one of the best things to learn, particularly around the professional speaking business, is in the PSA. Is learn from everybody who's speaking, but then you got to sieve that information and still become yourself. So you don't want, even though I love and admire fantastic speakers like Zig Ziglar, who was one of the founders, wasn't he, really, in the US,
yes,
of that whole industry, and it was very sad when he passed away. And I still like to listen to his stuff, but I can never be him. It's taking some of the stuff, like, he told a key story there, and then he unpacked that story. But what's my key story? What's Lee Jackson's key story?
yes.
That's one of the differences, because I can't be Zig Ziglar, I can't be Tony Robbins, or I can't be, you insert a name there. I can't be that person. I can only be Lee Jackson.
Yes. Yes. And you are Lee Jackson, as a matter of fact.
Well, thank you, Greg.
The author of Get Good at Presenting, the No-Nonsense Guide to, as he said, authentic and engaging public speaking. Lee's website is leejackson.biz, and the book title, again, Get Good at Presenting, the No-Nonsense Guide to Authentic and Engaging Public Speaking. The last thing I want to ask you, because you really piqued my curiosity here, you mentioned stand-up comedians.
Yeah.
What can I learn from them as a business speaker? And are you giving me permission to spend, my evenings watching comedy on TV and podcasts and YouTube videos and things? Can that actually be useful for me?
It's one of the most useful things I think you can do. I mean, I'm a student of comedy. I love comedy. I've done some of it myself because, as a professional speaker, how do you push yourself? Probably the only place to go is either to be a mime artist or to do stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy is really hardcore. It's, if I speak for an hour in a business, and if I get a laugh every couple of minutes, every 5 minutes, I'll be happy with that. Comedians are aiming for a laugh about every 20 seconds. And that just brings, it's like speaking on amphetamines, on speed. It's like bringing a whole different level to it. So it does sharpen you up for sure. And I watch it. And so my favorite of all time was Robin Williams. And he was a great improviser, of course, but just the way he told stories was just fantastic. And I'd advise everyone to watch Live at the Met by Robin Williams from about 1988. It is just a masterclass in presenting, in storytelling, in not taking yourself too seriously. It's just wonderfully authentic. He talks about his foibles, the things he's got wrong, but he talks about them in a wonderful way. And, he's not offensive. He's not having to go at anybody. He's just someone you could really sit. And that one is certainly, there's a few things that probably don't work these days because names have changed. But on the whole, that one passes the test of time. Live at the Met by Robin Williams. I love to watch that every year.
Wow. Well, so I have to ask, can you think of a time where you were speaking, either when you were on the stage as a stand-up comedian or as a business speaker? Can you think of a time where you really failed, really went down in flames, but walked away thinking that was one of the most valuable experiences I ever had because X?
Yeah, I didn't fail. I was definitely below average. I've never had a disaster, I've never, been terrible. And I still actually got a gig off this one. So somebody liked me in the audience, but it was one of the first.
Knew you were not happy with it. It sounds.
Yeah. Well, I've been really helped and mentored by a few people. And one of them is Paul McGee. Paul McGee is known as the sumo guy, very successful, excellent speaker, travels the world. And Paul sort of took me under his wing a little bit. And he gave me an opportunity to speak at a day he was putting on. And it was one of the first professional talks I ever did. And I guess I did half an hour, and about 10 minutes of it was pretty awful. And I think it's because I really wasn't comfortable in my own skin at that point, that I was trying to be all things to all people. I was trying to be a business speaker instead of just being Lee Jackson. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to prove to the audience that I was okay. And it backfired a little bit. So he gave me some feedback. And he said to me afterwards, I'll never forget, he didn't say that was terrible because he's a very kind man. He said, that was okay, Lee. It wasn't good, but it was okay. Let's talk about some stuff that we can make it even better. So it wasn't a disaster, but I never made that mistake ever again.
Did you know while you were on the stage that it was the quality that he said? Did you have some sense of how you were doing, or did you not realize it until later?
The particular section that I did, I think I got through it quite quickly, and I realized as I was doing it, that just isn't working well. I could see the disconnection with people.
Yeah.
But the reason thankfully I made up for it later. So,
yes.
So, audiences are fairly forgiving, unless you're being offensive, they're fairly forgiving. But yeah, I'm glad that I did that, and I'll never do that again.
Well, and the reason I ask, and I want to end with this, the reason I asked is I wanted to hear about a time where you learned by getting up and doing something that was a risk for you, because really what you're suggesting for the rest of us is get up and try it and learn. And part of that is taking a risk, but you can't get ahead until you take the risk and try, right?
It's really as simple as that. I think a lot of people just don't try. I've got friends of mine who are probably stuck in the same job for their whole life. And the reason they're stuck in that job is because they are maybe nervous about interviews or something. Yeah. And they thought, do you know what? I never want to have a job interview ever again. And so they stay in their job. And you think, if you just get out there and try it, you may fail, but you may do well. So who knows, And
the reality is we're all presenting every day, unless you have decided you never want to do another job interview again because you're terrified. Because what is a job interview? It's presenting.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. So when people on Facebook, my friends say, I've got a job interview tomorrow, I'm really nervous. I think, well, as someone who runs my own business, I probably have about 3 of those a day.
Exactly right.
So I was like, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Yeah. And if you do 3 a day, the baseball statistics are more in your favor, right? I mean, if you only have 1, you better get it right or you go down in flames. If you have 3 a day, you get to learn from it and you get to have some failure and some success.
I mean, these few minutes that we've spent together, Greg, in effect, this is a job interview, isn't it? This is, because if I was really rubbish, you would never use this content. I mean,
well, we'll have to wait and see if it actually shows up.
Well, yeah, I know. I mean, that is a risk that I'm saying that. But ironically, they would never know, would they, Greg? So.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. He is Lee Jackson. He's an international speaker, a presentation coach. He's the author of 12 books. The 12th book is Get Good at Presenting, the No-Nonsense Guide to Authentic and Engaging Public Speaking. His website is leejackson.biz. The book is available on Amazon and his website. Lots of other great stuff at Lee's website as well. It's leejackson.biz. Lee, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you so much, and thanks for all you do. Great show. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this encore podcast presentation from Forbes Books at ForbesBooks.com.